Mm-hmm.
Hassan, is that you? Mute yourself. We can hear you.
All right. Good morning once more, and welcome to everybody on the call. It is my singular pleasure, first of all, to welcome all of you here present to this roundtable, the Tuskegee University Interdisciplinary Seminar Series, Black History Month Roundtable, during which we will spend some time talking about work, some unsung Black voices and revolutionary voices and visions from pre-colony to post-independence and beyond. Well, for starters, it gives me pleasure to see all of you on board. My dear, those who contributed to the volume, my colleagues at Tuskegee University, the students, you are all welcome to this call. But before we get into the heat of things, I would like to introduce Miss Tasha Harris, who would be presenting or who would be telling us about the contributors to this volume or those on this round table, as well as the moderator. So Miss Tasha Harris, was born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and she is currently an honor student here at Tuskegee University. She is a junior and double majoring in political sciences and psychology. Ms. Harris serves on multiple organization e-boards and in many different capacities. She is a pre-law society secretary and web designer for the Tuskegee Year Book Club, graphic designer, and Crimson Curves senator proxy. Ms. Harris plans to attend law school and specialize in trial or civil rights law. And she has the goal of becoming a judge one day. And why not? A Supreme Court justice. Ms. Harris, thank you. Would you do us the honor? Tell us about those who are on this round table.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Indy. I will be telling you all about the panelists today, starting with Dr. Bill Indy. He's a professor of modern languages, communication, and philosophy at Tuskegee University. He earned his dual doctorate from the University of Cergy-Pontoise in 2001. He is a poet, a playwright, a storyteller, literary critic, translator, historian of ideas and mentalities, as well as an academic who has held teaching positions in several universities in Australia, France, and elsewhere. His areas of teaching and research comprise, among other, English languages and literatures, French professional, technical and creative writing, world literatures, applied historical linguistics, literary history, media and communication studies, peace, Quaker studies, and conflict resolutions, history of internationalism, history of ideas and mentalities, translation and translatology, 17th century and contemporary cultural studies. He has published intensively in these areas. His publications include numerous scholarly works of early Quakerism and translation of early Quaker writings. He has also published poetry and plays in both French and the English language. Professor Bill Indy has 25 published volumes of poetry, in which 6 are in French, a play and 4 works and 4 translations. He is a co-editor of Outward Evil, Inward Battle, Human Memory and Literature with Adaku T. Ankumah, Benjamin Hart Fishkin, and Festus Fru Indai, as well as co-editor of Fears, Doubts, and Joys of Not Belonging to the Repressed, Expressed, and Living, Independence, Critical Perspectives, and Global Interdependence with Adaku T. Ankumah and Benjamin Hart Fishkin. His most recent edited work, In Secret Silences and Betrayals. Also, he has served as National Endowment for the Humanities Scholars. Next on the panel list is Dr. Adaku T. Ankumah. Hello. Department Chair and Professor of English at Tuskegee University. She received her PhD in Comparative Literature from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a minor in drama. Her dissertation and initial research interests focus on revolutionary playwrights from the African diaspora, such as Kenyan Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Martiniquais writer Ami Siazer and African American writer Imari Baraka, who used their creative efforts to work for the destruction of what they consider to be the colonial capitalist foundation of post-colonial Africa. Gugi's play, considered to be the Gugi's play, The Trial of Dead and Timothy, a play that examines the arrest and trial of one of the famous leaders of the Mau Mau revolt against the British in Kenya in the 1950s, has been the subject of her published research. She has also done research on the role of women in revolutionary theater, voicelessness of African women, and gender and politics in the works of African women authors like Mariamba Ba, Ama Atu Edu, and Sitsu Danguramba. Professor Ankumah's recent research interests include the writings of women in the African diaspora. This includes research of memory and literature and its role in helping those dealing with painful, fragmented past forge a wholesome future in Edward Danticat's The Dew Breaker. She has also examined memory and resistance in the poetry of South African performer and writer Jinsia Mgoe. Her notable edited works in non-nomenclatural poetization and globalization. Also, she co-edited with Bill Ende, Benjamin Hart Fishkin, and Festus Fru Ende, Outward Evil, Inward Battle, Human Memory and Literature, and with Professor Ende and Benjamin Hart Fishkin, Fears, Doubts, and Joys of Not Belonging, the Repressed, Expressed, and Living Independence, Critical Perspectives, and Global Interdependence. Next, we have Dr. Benjamin Hart Fishkin, Associate Professor of English at Tuskegee University. Specializing in teaching 19th century British literature, he holds a PhD from the University of Alabama, where he serves as Junior Fellow in the Blount Undergraduate Initiative. Prior to earning his doctorate from the University of Alabama in May of 2009, he obtained a BA in English and Film from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and an MA from Miami University, Oxford, Ohio, where he examined the interests of Charles Dickens in the theater and how the stage influenced his novel writing. He has published The Undependable Bounds of Blood, The Unanticipated Problems of Parenthood, and the novels of Henry James. He co-edited Outward Evil, Inward Battle, Human Memory and Literature with Akudu T. Ankumah, Bill F. Ende, and Festus Fru Ende. And Fears, Doubts, and Joys of Not Belonging, The Repressed, Expressed, and Living Independence, Critical Perspectives, and Global Interdependence with Bill Akudu Ankumah. Benjamin Hart Fishkin is presently working on the concept of chaos, upheaval, and tragedy in a comprehensive study of the novels of the Southern Cameroonian author Emmanuel Fru Dahl. Besides his growing interest in Anglophone Cameroon or British Southern Cameroon literature, his recent research interests include the problems of marriage, family, and relationship in the age of globalization. Next on the panelists, we have Dr. Derick Hendricks. He hails from St. Thompson, U.S. Virgin Islands. He has an associate's faculty at Notre Dame of Maryland University and an Department of History, located in Baltimore, Maryland, where he taught one course of African diaspora experience. Currently, he is a lecturer in the Department of History and Geography at Morgan State University, where he teaches Introduction to the African Diaspora. Dr. Hendricks has been an educator for 19 years and began his teaching career at the junior and high school level at St. Peter and Paul High School in St. Thomas. He has also taught at the community college level in Virginia. Dr. Hendricks earned his PhD degree in history from Morgan State University in 2009. The title of his dissertation in Black Awareness and Social Unrest in the US Virgin Islands, a case study of Black nationalism. His most recent publications is Youth Responses to Discriminatory Practices, the Free Bench Movement. Thomas, who's exposed to various aspects of Black consciousness, both reactive and progressive, he is also editing several other chapters of his dissertation for peer-reviewed publication. In addition, he plans to revisit his dissertation and transform it into a book. Dr. Hendricks' research interests are African diaspora, Black consciousness, activism in the US Virgin Islands, and Black nationalism. To that end, he has presented on the topic of Black consciousness, activism in the US Virgin Islands, as well as the topic of Black nationalism in several forums. Next on the panel list, we have Dr. Elizabeth N. Ayuk-Etang. Hello. She is an associate professor, a scholar, a gender advocate, and an eco-feminist critic. She teaches at the University of Baoulé, Cameroon. She holds a PhD in Black women's writing from the University of Yaoundé, Cameroon. She has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals and authored book chapters on the status of Black women in Africa. Her research interest is on Black women's studies, women in development in Africa, ecofeminism, and sustainable development in Black communities. Her notable publications appeared in Bill Endy, Benjamin Fishkin, and Adaku and Ankumah, Living Independence, Critical Perspective on Global Interdependence. They include the following: Women, Dependence, Independence, and Land Usage in the Cameroon, an eco-feminist reading of Buale Butake, Late God, and Palm One Will Float. Also, Migration, Dependence, Freedom, and Independence in Ifeoma Shanba, Merchant of Flesh. She is currently working on the place of the woman in higher education institutions in Africa. She is a recipient of many prestigious awards, including the Michigan African Presidential Scholars Fellowship. Next on the panelists, we have Dr. John Tilghman. Greetings. He is an associate professor of the history of Tuskegee. Let me start over. Dr. John Tilghman. He is an associate professor of history at Tuskegee University. He is a native of Baltimore, Maryland, who holds a bachelor's degree in US history from Coppin State University and a Master of Arts degree and PhD in US history from Howard University. His publications and research center on US urban history, post-war Black freedom struggle in the US, social movements in the African diaspora, and the readings and writings of Walter Rodney. Thank you. Next on the panelists, we have Dr. Mark Henderson.
Dr. Henderson, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Can we have your image, please?
My camera does not work.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. Let's go ahead.
Greetings, Dr. Henderson. He is an associate professor of English, currently working at Tuskegee University. He earned his PhD at Auburn University with concentrations in American literature and psychoanalytic theory. Research and his interests include American Gothic, American modernism, American film, and Afrofuturism. The concentrations for the MA that he earned from the University of Louisiana at Monroe is creative writing. Next on the panelists, we have Dr. Thomas Jing.
I have problems with my camera.
Greetings. He is a novel scholar and researcher. He was born in Dal in the Cameroons. He attended Sacred Heart College, Mankin, Bamenda, and CCAS Kimbu before enrolling at the University of Yaoundé, where he obtained a BA in history after a stint as a history and French language teacher at government secondary school. He left for Canada to study translation at the University of Montreal, equipped with an MA in translation. He returned to Cameroon and worked at the Ministry of Livestock, Fisheries, and Animal Industries as senior translator and service head for documentation archives. During this time, he wrote articles for a number of local newspapers and magazines, notably Cameroon Post and Cameroon Live. Amid growing political tension in Cameroon, he left for South Africa, where he worked with the Juzit Refugee Service as spokesperson for refugees and as he was a spokesperson for refugees and asylum seekers and the editor of Kwanzaa, the organization English-French bilingual newsletter. He later left for Canada, where he did a PhD at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan. His PhD dissertation focused on using African folk dances for community organization and educational promotion in North American diaspora community. He has published 2 novels, Witch in English, Tale of the African Woman, and the other in French. He has contributed articles for Soviet reviews. His main research interests in African folk dance and education among diaspora Blacks. Thank you. That will be our panelists for today. And now I'll be introducing our moderator, Jelani Ecos. Hello. Mr. Jelani is a Tuskegee University sophomore majoring in mechanical engineering from Mississippi. Though he is well-versed in mathematics, he is an avid learner of the English language and both its usage and literature. He is a classical pianist, guitarist, and composer. Mr. Ecos is also into writing poetry. Thank you. I will hand it over to you to do your moderating.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Ms. Harris, for just a great introduction. Once again, my name is Jelani Enoch, and today we will be doing a roundtable discussion of the book of revolutionary voices from pre-colonialism afterwards and onwards throughout Africa and North America. So I think the first question we'll start off with is to the editor first, Dr. Indy. Why do you think this collection of post-revolutionary and pre-colonial, Black voices is important to the overall body of literary knowledge?
Well, thank you, Mr. Enoch, for that very brilliant question. It is quite an opening question. And I would like to predicate my answer with the notion of what we call conscious cultivation of ignorance or agnotology. We live in a world that leans more and more towards the obliteration of painful memories. And without the care to address, say, the root causes of this pain. And we are fully aware the saying goes, no past, no present, no future. So there is really need for Blacks as a people to delve into the past in order for us to delve into the past so that we can make sense of where we are at present and where we are headed. Let us not forget, we are in the age of fake news, alternative facts, alternate reality, which has, become more and more pressing and actually bearing facts that could help free us from the yoke of oppression as well as exploitation. So this collection that we are talking about is actually a collection that anticipates the opposition that we have in the US today on critical race theory, because people don't want us to address the root causes of the pain that the nation is going through. So the goal of bringing together all the panelists, the contributors to this chapter, was actually to tease out of them, they are scholars, they are professionals, they are academics in different disciplinary areas as we've heard. So we wanted to tease out of them their take on Black revolutionaries and visionaries. And we had to explore a number of questions. We can only solve problems by answering questions, find out who our revolutionaries are, find out what their contributions have been, find out the far-reaching effects of their contribution, find out why are their contributions talked about or not even talked about, all right? And looking at our situation in the current global dispensation, we talk of globalization, the global village. If the world is a global village, then what is the role of the respective governments? Are they operating the way they should be? Okay. Does the revolutionary and visionary stance of our revolutionaries still belong and fit satisfactorily in what we can call the post-colonial world of the 21st century? The question goes on, and we could even try to find out whether, as Black people worldwide, we can pride ourselves to living free and with development. We have liberation, we have the development that we need. So I would really round up by telling you that the various scholars that you have here on this roundtable draw from historical, sociological, psychological, anthropological, literary, political, economic, scientific, international, as well as other perspectives of our revolutionary voices and vision across time. And we should not forget that everywhere in the world there is oppression, there are always voices and visions rising and standing up against the oppressors. So I'll not go too far. I could continue, but let me just stop in one point, why this book is so necessary. Okay, it is because of the unwillingness of hegemons, those who are in power, not willing to embrace or acknowledge any iota of egalitarianism, meaning the Black man is equal to every other person. That is not what they want. So with revolutionaries, their activism, their accomplishments, their life works, okay, we cannot allow them to be misrepresented, distorted, or drowned in cacophony in the cacophony of colonial and imperial or neo-colonial globalization. Let me pause there. I think I did satisfy your curiosity with that answer. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much. Okay, so that is that question to the editor. Now I have a general question to all of the panelists. It'll be open, for short comment before we go into more specifics for each of the panelists. My general question to all of you is, how does your particular subject in the book that you expounded on relate to the Black struggle for freedom? And that's any panelist can answer.
This is Dr. Mark Henderson. Can you hear me?
Sir?
Hi, hello. My arm of my contribution deals with Afrofuturism, which is a form of speculative fiction, which by nature asks the fundamental question of what if? And the word speculative there is especially in relation to American history, and again, its current state given the presence of alternative facts and this sort of white hegemonic fear of true history. Speculative almost is ironic, really, especially within Afrofuturism, because yes, they're painting something speculative that is fictional, but in fact, what they are really doing is calling out a greater fiction that is the sort of white hegemonic American mythology, kind of that agreed upon narrative, and clearly its faults, its fallacies, its ignorances, and its flat out lies. So the speculation there through that particular subgenre, it's kind of a bit of fictional jujitsu, because it confronts clearly what is the greater, much more problematic, agreed upon status quo fiction, and is kind of turning a mirror, forcing it to sort of look itself in the mirror and point out its dishonesties and I guess it's what's the word? It's fractured nature. It's very tenuous quote unquote reality.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Tilghman, I'd like to also respond to that question as well. In my work, I was looking at Dr. Walter Rodney, who was born and raised in Guyana. And of course, he was an African history professor, but also he's also a theoretician of the Black Power movement that went on globally, both in the continent of Africa and in Jamaica as well, and throughout the Caribbean. His ideals, what he was talking about, and it's something that folks don't want to talk about today, is when we talk about the Black Power movement, we tend to forget the role that Marxism and socialism play in that movement as well. And Walter Rodney was a major theoretician in cultivating ideas and strategies of utilizing socialist theory and Marxist theory as part of major concepts of the Black Power movement. And not just Walter Rodney, you had other figures in the Black Power movement throughout the globe who did that. Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, had those same concepts as well, who was a Pan-Africanist. You've also had the Black Panther Party members who were, they started out Black Catholics, but they also merged on to become Marxist-Leninists, and then they adopted Maoism because they view a communal society or a society that has been exploited by capitalism to be a more preferable society for Black society, to attain their Black self-identity and pretty much to have equality and egalitarian in their communities as well. So those theories were major during the 1960s and 70s, during the era of Walter Rodney. He put those into his books. The Grounding with My Brothers, and of course, if you haven't read this book, you should, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. which shows you the impact of capitalism had on the African world and every continent. And in the Black Power movement, once those leaders are literally killed or jailed, it's like they literally tend to be forgotten. And you shouldn't bring these names up or their ideas up anymore. I mean, even today, we look at certain historians who write about the Black Panther Party and Walter White. It's very fluff. It doesn't really touch home to what they're really articulating. And those ideas that they were talking about in the past should be talked about today and curing some of the social economic ills that we have in the Black community as well. And I'll keep my comments there. I'll end my comment right there. So that's my 3 or 4 minutes that I talked about.
Sure. So much.
Hey. Hello, Mr. Enoch, may I comment?
Yes, sir, no problem.
Okay. This notion of the Black struggle for freedom, a very important question, probably has many facets that go to it. What I was trying to figure out in composing this particular chapter is what was going on in Africa and Cameroon in specific in one of Francis Nyamnjoh's books called Merry But Available. And what I found is that, yes, people are struggling, but he likes to talk about their own personal and social lives and how they pursue them to excess. Now, I'm not being judgmental, and I'm not trying to take really a moral viewpoint here, but it seems to me that this kind of a struggle that we're talking about, or that I was talking about, or that Nyamnjoh is talking about, is where people's relationships, which they're free to do whatever they like in their own lives, cause more problems. So we have a lot of people who we be considered, I believe the word would be prolific in quotation marks, and they're having lots of romantic kinds of relationships that usually end in not only some chaos, but chaos that is exponentially improved upon from what was before. And what he hints at or points to, he won't come out and say it overtly, is something like these kinds of traits are coming from the West, meaning people's social habits, their relationships, the things they buy, the kinds of methods of behavior they use, which cause problems, really are not inherently African traits. And this is probably, and I'm only guessing here, I might be wrong, probably not what people first think about when they think about issues between Africa and other parts of the world. That once a certain way of thinking is introduced, not only does it cause problems, okay, but it encroaches upon and may very well erase what was there beforehand. I'd be happy to speak further. I just don't wish to take up too much time. It's an unusual approach, and there is a lot of humor in the text, but I think there's a much more serious meaning underneath, and that is a meaning that I think some readers might miss while they're enjoying it.
Sure. You'll have a chance to speak a bit more when we get to the more specific part of this.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Sure. Any more comments?
Yes, please. Can I play?
Yes, ma'am, of course.
Okay. Thank you so much. My name again is Elizabeth Ayuk-Etang from Cameroon, from the University of Buea. My preoccupation in some of the chapters, some unsung Black revolutionary voices. The first had to do with resistance and its attitudinal resistance. This is This is because when I look at Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl and Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, I noticed that most Black women actually use resistance as part of their survival strategies. And using resistance, if you take all the characters, you realize that attitudinal resistance is something that has been in Black women writings. Many of the Black women, when you write, you start from Morrison, you go to Angela Davis. Angela Davis actually looks at it from a gender perspective, where she looks at subtle resistance. And you know, looking at subtle resistance, she feels that the resistance should avoid revolt. But other writers came up and actually said, with attitudinal resistance, we can eventually get to revolt. And that is the revolution that I noticed in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God and Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And I also linked, did cross-references to Toni Morrison's Beloved to show that Black women have been in chains for so long, but they had to come out of that chain by resisting some of the patriarchal strictures that were imposed on them, especially the racism that I term them systemic and structural. Systemic because it is part of a system. And you know, since it is part of the system, they can't just come out and start revolting, but they have to take their time, especially when we see them as being pushed to be breeders of slaves. And then they decide to come up with mercy killing, infanticide, as part of their resistance. And so in due course, as we'll be talking, and I'll go particularly into my work and my paper, we're going to see examples from all of this attitudinal resistance that these Black women put to actually shoulder or show off some of the patriarchal strictures that were imposed on them.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other panelists?
Yes, I'm just going to talk briefly about mine. Generally, when we think about the Black struggle for freedom, we are thinking about people who are at the forefront of these revolutions, leading sit-ins, this, that, other things which look more engaging in the actual process of freedom. And they have been celebrated for their contributions in bringing about change. However, a revolution always needs its visionaries, what I'll call the cheerleaders. These are the ones who use their writings to encourage and to foster a change in the ways even of thinking. And part of it is that language is very important in the struggle for freedom. And it becomes a weapon of liberating the mind. So the first area that they're attacking is the mind as an important battleground in any struggle for freedom. Language aims at destroying the lies that sometimes, unfortunately, the oppressed are believing about themselves because they've heard it so long that becomes their reality. And so you have to undo, kind of bring that down, that kind of thing. So yes, you need the writer. The second thing is, it's a new way of thinking and structuring reality because of that, because people have to start thinking differently. In fact, Amir Baraka, one of the revolutionary writers, also talks about the fact that he uses verbal violence to inflict mental injury on the oppressor, that the oppressor too has to change in some ways, and language will help him do that. So language gives new aspirations to these people who are trying to revolt against a system which has kept them down, and we'll talk more about that. Thank you.
Man, thank you.
Dr. Hendricks, Dr. Jing.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I decided to write on Keïta Fodéba and Fela Kuti, who are two cultural icons as far as Africa is concerned. I've always looked at Black struggle from the perspective of culture. You see, one of the very first things that the West took away from Africans when they brought them over here in America and other parts of the world was to take their culture away from them. Partly because they knew the relevance, they knew the importance of culture to them. Today, it's very easy or commonplace for people to ask questions like, oh, the Chinese just came here yesterday. They are succeeding. Why are Black people not succeeding? Well, the Chinese came here with their culture. Nobody took their culture away from them. So when a Chinese comes, he starts with a Chinese restaurant, which is his culture. He starts with teaching Kung Fu, which is his culture. But as soon as Black people got here, they took away their dance, they took away their sense of community, they took away their music, they took everything away from them. Now they were supposed to operate within the framework of a system that is very, very unused to them. So if you look at it critically, you realize that Native Americans, whose culture was also destroyed, as was that of Africans, almost ended up with the same plight. So now the question is, how do these two characters fit into the picture? The two characters are depicted in my work. Well, for one thing, dance in Africa encompasses everything. Dance is music, dance is dance, dance is poetry, dance is fashion, dance is sculpture. So in the end, you see, it has different, how do I call it, portfolios that draws different members of community within a certain group and holds them together. So one way to build community is to use dance, because if you are not interested in music, at least you are interested in fashion. If you are not interested in fashion, at least you are a poet. If you are not a poet, you are a historian. If you are not a historian, you love sculpture. So you see people come in with different contributions, thereby bringing community together. So that is why I decided to use dance to focus on musicians and dance. In fact, in Africa, when you talk dance, you talk music. So the two go together. If I called my father now and then I asked, and then I said, I'm dancing. Then he said, but I can't hear music. And then I said, there's no music, I'm just dancing. Then he would think I've taken a bottle of tequila. So, so the two always go together. That is why I focus on the Fodéba Keïta, who is the founder of Ballet African, which is arguably the most popular dance group. And then Fela Kuti, who came up with this music genre called Afrobeat that is so popular and has, in fact, you don't even need to be a Black person today to play Afrobeat. It is played in Japan, it is played in Chile. So I decided to bring these people to show the role that music and dance can play in the liberation of Black people. People have talked of negritude, we've gone into philosophy like Afrocentricity and so on and so forth, but sometimes we need a practical aspect that people can actually feel and can benefit from it. So that is, but I'll go into specifics, as we progress. Thank you.
Yes, hello. My name is Derick Hendricks. My contribution to the book was based on an earlier work that I had done. The specific contribution that I did looked at a student organization called the Black Cultural Organization at the College of the Virgin Islands. In terms of this contribution from Dr. ND, it was consistent with the resistance movement of African people, not just in the Caribbean, but all around the world. Specifically, I looked at how the Black Cultural Organization impacted the US Virgin Islands from a political, social, and economic standpoint. In terms of when we get to the specific questions about the Black Cultural Organization, I can go more into detail. But I believe, just like the other panelists, it is consistent from a historical standpoint as well as a sociological standpoint with a larger narrative as it relates to the Black liberation struggle.
Sure.
Right. Thank you. Let me jump in here and say a little bit about the chapter I wrote. I wrote a chapter on Hailu, or Gebreyessus Hailu, a Tigrinian, and Tigris is actually in Ethiopia or Eritrea. He's Eritrean. And my interest in him was some sort of curiosity that this Gebreyessus Hailu wrote a novel in Tigrinya in 1927 and writing in an African language. I started teasing out, why was he writing in an African language? He is using his African language as a revolutionary tool. I don't need my oppressors to understand my strategy. I want to use this language to change the world the way it is. And Eritrea was under Italian colonization. And Italians had actually hijacked the country and everything that belongs to the culture and education of youths and transformed them into mercenaries. And these mercenaries, what they did was to spend their time fighting other conquered people to enslave Libyans. And Gebreyessus uses his writing as a way to tell these young people going into war that you cannot abet your enslaver in his endeavor. You should actually join the other people they are trying to conquer in a revolution. When we will get to the specifics, I will say a lot more because Gebreyessus Hailu, in spite of the publication of his novel in 1927, African writing credits novel writing to Chinua Achebe's 1958 Things Fall Apart. But we have a writing in an African language. So do we mean the novel in the African language is less of a significance to the novel in the English language? These are all questions. And we realize even that Gebreyessus Hailu did not just write for the sake of writing. He didn't just have a narrative. He wanted to write to change the mindset. Like Bell Hooks asserts that they get to a point where, you know, the oppressed becomes comfortable with his oppressor and feels that the oppressor is actually his or her protector. But Gebreyessus tells us it is time we sit up. We cannot be comfortable. We cannot just take things for what they are and just run with it. We have to examine critically. Ask yourself simple critical question. Why am I fighting the Libyan for? Why should I ally with the Eritrean to fight the Libyan? The Libyans are fighting to defend their homes. I have been hijacked from my own home to come and fight the Libyans. But Gebreyessus makes something that is so interesting, just the idea of instilling a sense of pride for fighting for one's freedom, which becomes the key thing that we all as a people should copy. And I thought that was very, very central, that at a time when nobody is talking about using language as a revolutionary tool, Gebreyessus is using it as a tool to oppose colonialism, using it as a tool to oppose war. And these are all things we are dealing with today that we still have not overcome. I'll rest there so that when we get to the specifics, we could talk more.
Sir, thank you so much. Okay, I think that is all the panelists for the general question. So now we'll move on to specifics. So I will ask each of the panelists a more specific question I think is more pertinent to think other aspects of your works that you've done in the book. And I ask that all of you expound, a bit more, maybe 5 or so minutes, for brevity purposes. So firstly, Dr. Ayuk-Etang, I want to ask you about your chapter. You wrote in both sections of the book, both Africa and North America. And even though those are very separate cultures as far as even Black people are concerned, do you think that the relationship between, say, the Black man and woman in either relationship, Africa or American, is a reflection of how society treats the Black race in general?
Thank you very much, Delany. I think I wrote in both sections of the book, and looking at just the Black man or the Black woman or the Black woman in Africa and the diaspora. I'll start by saying that the Black woman, be it in Africa or in the diaspora, are being oppressed. And they have one common feature. Just moving from Africa to the USA is just carrying their culture, and this whole culture of suppression, patriarchy. The Black woman in Africa is not different from the Black woman in America. There might be some differences that we'll get into it when we talk of. There are differences as far as culture is concerned. But the attitude from the works that I presented, especially when I use Okot Bitek Song of Lawino in Africa from Tanzania, and then I also looked at the Black woman in America from Toni Morrison's perspective, from Harriet Jacobs' perspectives in Incidents of the Life of a Slave Girl, and from Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. We realize that they have a common feature, and this feature is just that of oppression. But then, like I said, the Black woman is not inferior, but she is being inferiorized by the society. And so that is one of the things that we realized. And so, like Deborah White would tell us, the slave women were everywhere, but they were not anywhere, which means that the Black woman is being stifled, be it in Africa or in America, even their write-ups. You will not read about them. And that is why Deborah White tells us, they were slaves, they were everywhere, but they were nowhere because they were not written. Their stories were not written down. And we actually need to read their stories. So we could actually put their strength to see what they were able to do. There have been great writers, Black writers, be it in Africa or in the diaspora, whose works have not been published, or they have to use a pen name to publish their works. And we have an African woman, Gabrielle Madrasi, if I'm not mistaken. She says the reason that the Black woman's works were not published because most often they were being read or written by men. And so men will write them. But then these women, when men write them, men tell their story. And they don't want to be represented by men. They want to tell their own story. And when the men tell the story, they will not put it the way the stories really are. And that is why in Black women writings, we say that the men are either unwilling or unable to the way it is. And so when you look at the woman in Africa telling her story, let's start from the first Black woman that Florence Stranton considers as the first African woman, which is Flora Nwapa in Efuru. We see that these are women with a lot of potentials. These are very solid, strong women who from nothing, they are able to resist certain cultures, although they stand by their husbands and they make things work. Through Bushi Emecheta Titi Dangaremba in Nervous Conditions and the Book of North, we can go on and on. But you will see that there is subtle resistance in their work because the men has already struggled to envelop them. But Sheikh Anta Diop told us that the Black woman, the pre-colonial Black woman, had a place in Africa. And since some of the societies were matriarchal in nature, they actually had their strength. We can name them. Madame Tinibu in Nigeria. We had all the Black women. But Bell Hooks comes up and says, not all the Black women, because African American women are not matriarchs. They can't be matriarchs because They don't have control of on their body. If they could control their own bodies, then we'll talk about matriarchy in the African American society. So when we look at all of this and the Black women coming to showcase their strength, we realize that even Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I don't know if it's Ngugi wa Thiong'o or it's anyway, the early writers, they show the strength of the Black women. But with the coming of colonialism, we realize that some of these powers were taken away from them. Well, we will go into details if we have to go so far to discuss how these strengths were taken away from their powers. But be it in Africa or in the US, the Black woman has always been suppressed by the Black man. And if I have to follow the ladder, the social ladder that Karen Warren, an ecofeminist, actually placed, she says, we have the white man, the white woman, the Black man, and then the Black woman, and then the African woman. But then we see that even if we have to look at the social strata, the Black woman is still making her voice being heard. And now that is why we see they are bringing in this resistance to make their voices heard, but they are not fighting the men, especially the African women, but they are complementing the men and then moving forward. I think so. When I look at it from the African and the diaspora perspective, with some of Lawino, we take Lawino for instance. Lawino is very educated. Even when we hear she's very resourceful. But then, with the respect that she has for her husband, she keeps complaining. You say I'm filthy. You say I'm dirty. You've acquired the Western culture. What culture are we talking about here? Is it that we're trying to say that there is a culture that is superior to another? Of course, in Homecoming, Ngugi wa Thiong'o tells us that no culture is superior to another. But then the husband, Okot, comes home and sees her, brings in a modern woman, and thinks that Lawino is of the old generation. Lawino now is old. And so Lawino tells us that the husband now has acquired this Western civilization, maybe the Western attitude of suppressing her, maybe the woman, even the Lawino herself, we see her as so many things, not just only the African woman, but even the African culture that the husband is trying to suppress. And when we come back now to the diaspora, let's take somebody like Harriet Jacobs, who uses the name Linda Brent as her heroine. We notice that there is this subtle resistance that Linda keeps going through. Linda tries, and at the end of the day, she decides to get pregnant, give birth to her children, and escape with the children. Anthony Morrison uses memory to bring out the identity of the Black woman. What kind of memory? In retrospection, a situation she did not witness, but she did not experience, but she has that memory to put it down in Beloved. And then we see the woman as a slave breeder. They keep breeding slaves. And what happens? Beloved comes in and they had to kill her. We have the ghost haunting. So why do we resist? Is it that the woman in Africa is different from the Black woman in the US or in the diaspora? Of course not. If we have to go to the Caribbean, Jamaica Kincaid tells us in a small place, in Lucy, in Annie John, in a small place, she tells us, like what Professor Bildi just said, we are writing in somebody's language that when he reads it, and we are trying to say that this is what we are writing about him, he makes a mockery of us. He says, you are using our language. And Jamaica Kincaid says, no mother tongue, no father tongue. The worst of it, no motherland. So you see this whole idea of being colonized and impose their own language on us. And then we try to use it. And so as a form of resistance, she said, okay, since people like Ngugi have argued that they will write in a language that the white man will not understand, but then they are writing because they want to showcase their culture. And people like Kincaid says, no, let's write, let them make a mockery of it. But then we are writing in the language that they will understand. They will understand that this is what we are trying to say. When they came, they changed the names of the streets. They brought the Bakeless banks and the rest to show us that this is what they have brought for us. But what do we do? Should we just fold our arms and sit and watch them? And so in a small place, we see this lamentation. But then this lamentation is telling us in commitment in literature and conscientization, that we don't just sit and fold our arms, but we should be able to say, okay, no, we don't want this, but we use our pen. We use our pen, which is mightier than the sword. We don't want to go the Russian way. We don't want to go the Russian way. So we're going to use our pen to tell them the things that we can do to come out of this, the things that they have done to us. And we think we are not comfortable and we are not happy with them. I think it's the same situation where we see Jenny, in their eyes, were watching God. Resisting Kelly's. Her grandmother forced her, that is forced marriage, and she has to go into it. But then she was in search of love, and she could not find love. And so she keeps moving from one relationship to the other. When she meets Joe, don't expose your hair. Make sure you cover your hair. And at one point, when Joe dies, what does she do? She removes every scalp and bends them and start moving around the house with her hair to say that you've enveloped me enough. I think it is time for me to go out the way I want to. And even the love I could not see, even just sitting and talking, you will not want, you render me voiceless, and you don't want me to have a voice. But I think I have a voice and surprisingly, the whole idea of sisterhood comes in, because even the community, though not comfortable with the systemic racism, could protect her, not really protecting her in the open, but they were not comfortable with Joe's attitude towards her as a mayor. And it helps to bring Joe down. And so she moves on. And when Joe died, she said, well, I'm mourning, not because I really want to mourn. One of the colors I can pick. And if I don't want it, I will no more wear it before she finds TK, what is TK? So I think this whole idea of resistance from Babalaharo's resistance literature, we see the Black woman coming out and trying to put some idea of some kind of resistance in their writings, because I'm using literature, in their writings to show that we can have our freedom and we can come out of this freedom. I'm happy when Professor, I don't know if it's Ampadu, if that's the name, when she talks of the change of mindsets. It is very important because if we don't change our mindsets, then we are not moving forward. Because that mindset is like, we are not staying here. This is what has been imposed on us and we don't want it and we are moving. And it takes me back to Bob Marley when he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Okay. Yes, so I want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for such a great response. Thank you so much. Okay, the next one, Dr. Fishkin, on your chapter. Now, I haven't read Married but Available myself, but it seems like it tells of a very, I guess you could call it a worst case Africa. You know, an Africa that's been completely overrun by Western cultures and ways, and really all of its immoralities and things. It's lost all its traditions and honor and values. Do you think Nyamnjoh's composing of the book is a wake-up call to the problems of African culture, or do you think it's just almost like a Jonathan Swift sort of just analysis of, you know, just that dreg of human nature?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Knox. I'll try to take the second part of it first. When I read Jonathan Swift, I do enjoy it. And I think of it as a great kind of a book that you can sit in a comfortable chair and have a cold drink or whatever you like by you. And you could really enjoy it. And there's a lot of humor in the satire. However, what I think is important to note is that they're really, in Swift, I don't think these are problems that can be solved or have a bona fide solution. I really don't think that's the case. And perhaps that's a little bit different from what Nyamnjoh is talking about. You know, surely there are no easy solutions. This is life, it's human life, and to look for easy solutions, I'm not sure they always exist, or if they do, no one told me about them. But as far as Nyamnjoh is concerned, he's presenting a case where people in Cameroon, in this case, he calls that Mimbo land, are going on all of this behavior. And I think I said a little while ago, I really don't think it's appropriate for me to make any kind of moral judgment about their behavior. People will do what people do, okay? And people have been having a love affairs for a long time, and I think they'll continue to do that, many years from now. But what I will say is, look at the consequences of these kinds of affairs, and look at the problems that exist. It only seems to exacerbate what was going on beforehand, okay? And I'm doing this from memory because I haven't looked at Married but Available in a while. The argument is something like this: the consequences of them for a relatively fleeting moment of feeling good are extremely complicated. Let me give you all one example that I can remember from Nyamnjoh's book, where a woman, probably not much older than college years, or maybe still an undergraduate, maybe around 21 or so, or 22, gets involved and is having a romance with a man who's probably 20 years older than she is, which in my mind raises all kinds of alarm bells, but it's their life, even though they're fictional characters. And he buys her a very, very expensive pair of shoes that she wants. I forget how much, but certainly however much they are is more than most women would ever pay for shoes. And then one night, walking home, okay, he walks by sort of a discotheque or something like that, peers in the window, and she's dancing with the shoes with another man.
Join the meeting.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm hearing something in the background. Yes. So he sees her in the dance hall or the discotheque. He charges in. He sits her down on the dance floor while people are dancing around them, and he rips off the shoes that he had bought her, and then all hell breaks loose, basically. And while I would want you to read Nyamnjoh from cover to cover, if you can get the gist of that story, you can encompass what that book is all about. Now, also in books like this, and certainly in Nyamnjoh, you often will see at least one couple that might be a generation older than that, or maybe two generations older than that. And it's a married couple that's probably been married for more than 50 years, and they're having tea or something stronger. And their essence is, what's happened to our society? What's wrong with our society? When I was 20, before I got married, I would never dream of walking around as women do. I would never dream of doing X or doing Y, or it would never have occurred to us. And where does all this come from? It seems to come from the West. Now, we can talk about, well, what year? I don't know. It probably didn't happen all of it at once. But I can tell you that these influences from the West, once injected into the African bloodstream, are a big problem. Now, I'm not saying they can't be fixed. Maybe there's a 10% chance they can be fixed, or a 15% chance they can be fixed. But we all know that we can't go back in time. We can't turn back the clock. And the question is, what do we do? And I think Nyamnjoh is saying that it's these forgotten things that are so important. But who under the age of, I'm guessing, maybe Dr. Indy could comment, who under the age of 55 or 60 is thinking that way. I read something 3 or 4 days ago. Often I'll come into my office, I'll put on my computer. It talks about celebrities. I don't even know their names. And one of them talked about how wonderful it is that someone who's a celebrity is only working on their third marriage. Now, if you understand that, that is what's transported over to Africa. I'm guessing this started in the 60s or so, maybe the 70s, but
Way before.
before that, maybe. But this is the problem. And if there are any benefits to Western culture, it's only to introduce a brand new kind of consumerism where people spend and spend and spend, not on food, not on shelter, not on transportation, but cute phones and things you can buy that you really don't need. They're really not necessary for survival, but Africans love them. One thing, and then I'll go, Nyamnjoh talks about someone who buys a cute cell phone and puts it on her lapel of her blouse or jacket, whatever it is. And it costs so much money to buy the phone that she doesn't have money to pay for the minutes. So it just sits on her lapel, but she doesn't make phone calls with it, and she doesn't receive phone calls with it. It's just something to see. And I think if you grab that, you understand exactly the message that I'm trying to get across. Yes, there's a solution, but it's not an easy one. And I don't think, looking forward, reading tea leaves, anyone should hold their breath too long, although I would like it to happen. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Indy, your question would be about the conscript. Now, I've read it. You gave the book to me. I read a very good book, and it was a short read, so I was able to get through. And obviously, you talked about, preserving your culture, speaking in your own language, making your thoughts in your language sort of be as pure and unadulterated as possible. When I read it as a young man myself, do you think Hailu also, besides the whole preservation of culture thing, did he also think that the protection of the youth of a culture and proper rearing to make sure they're not pulled astray by other, ways of thinking, do you think that's also an underlying theme in the book?
All right, thank you for that very pointed question. It is really, really a pointed question, I would say. And I would just like to draw attention. We've heard during this roundtable the idea of values imported from the West, things. Let's remember, Africa, besides being the farm where the West grabbed their slaves or stole their slaves and brought to the West, after they realized it was no longer beneficial to embark on such trade, they decided, well, we're not going to bother bringing them over. Let's just keep them over there enslaved. We'll just cut Africa into pieces, slides, and colonize them. So what I'm saying is that there is a constant in Gebreyessus the conscript, which points to the fact that colonization brought more than a handful of unpleasant surprises. And with the unpleasant surprises, Gebreyessus realizes that for there to be any form of change, then there must be something done. And what needs to be done is not just allowing the youths to run with the narratives of the colonized, to join the bandwagon, to go and fight wars that are not in their interest, to go and die for their tormentor, to go and die for their oppressors. So Gebreyessus, in his deep, deep conviction, says, let's look at it. I'm taking a young Eritrean soldier who has been brainwashed, taken, trained as a military. I'm going to get this guy back to his roots. The novel opens with a dramatic opening, and we see the main character or the hero of the novel, Tukwabo, coming back home after he's received his training and getting ready to go for war. But there is one thing he realizes: he cannot just go to war without having the blessings of his father and his mother. And when he comes back, he realizes that even with his uniform and with his guns, he still needs to humble himself. And Gebreyessus points out the chaotic environment of colonization is not the environment in which a young Black person will not be taken advantage of. So the best way, first of all, you want to protect them. And how do you protect them? By conscientizing them, by raising awareness, by making them understand that what they indulge in is totally wrong. And he takes these young people and goes with them to war and depicts a warring situation that is so untenable that they cannot even resist, that they start asking themselves questions. That is learning the lesson the hard way. And once they've learned that lesson the hard way, those who died are regretted, but those who come back regret ever going. And to Gebreyessus, that is the only way we could, we could protect young people. So I would sum my own bit by saying the only way to protect young people is to start with authenticity. It is only with authenticity Gebreyessus sees as a possibility for restoring order in a globalized world. And to him, he tries to aestheticize remembrances. He tries to aestheticize rebirth, revolution, okay? That has been brought to bear upon the youth of his country or of his world through colonization. And if we look at it, going back to slavery, it was the same kind of chaos. I think I've spent my 5 minutes. I'm very mindful of time. So I thank you. If there is any other question, we could talk about that.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Dr. Henderson, I have a question for you. Now, I was very intrigued by your chapter on the subject of Afrofuturism, especially as an engineer myself. I love science fiction. I read a lot of Verne, Wells, and the concept of sort of an African science fiction is very, very potent to me as a point. And I found very interesting that in the chapter, you noted that even though Afrofuturism is, as you said, sort of a retake on American history, it still had hints of American patriotism. Almost if you could rewrite history, Blacks would find being American. There's nothing wrong with a Black person being an American. So how would you incorporate this theme, say, in your teaching, to rectify or try to soften the trauma that American history has left on us as Black people?
Thank you for that question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe I touched on this somewhat in my earlier comment about the whole nature of speculative fiction. I'm sure you're familiar with the old chestnut that it's the winners who write the history books.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and well, what does truth have to do with that? Truth is at best in ironic quotation marks, right? So that alternative history arm of science fiction, and in this specific case, Afrofuturism, it serves as a kind of creative antidote to that. It revisits, because again, the whole grand narrative, the status quo narrative, is a myth. It is a fiction. It's a crime of omission, manipulation, and even outright invention, pulling things out of thin air. So we get back to this idea of, well, what it means to be American. And this is something that comes up in the American literature class that I teach. We have this idea, those who don't read literature from that time, that an understanding of the wrong-headedness of all of these supposed founding documents and the hypocrisy in things, inherent hypocrisy in things as foundational as the Declaration of Independence, we have this idea sometimes that, oh, okay, well, that is a later retrospective idea. But no, that the problems and the ironies within those statements, the reality of even the authors versus the more transcendent interpretation of what they actually put down on paper and what they say, I guess the spirit of the myth versus the practice, that little road where hypocrisy kind of lays itself as an obstacle, and everybody either kind of gets to stand around and move on, or stand around and agitate or rightfully annoy everybody by pointing out the obvious, which of course is kind of the definition of what protest is throughout American history. That's what this whole idea of pointing out what Americanism is through certainly the lens of Afrofuturism, the African American dimension of it anyway. It goes back to this very idea of, okay, well, what is American? And from the beginning, I mean, everyone from the Cherokee Nation to obviously Frederick Douglass, best known in his "What to the Slave is the 4th of July" speech, takes to task these very glaring, bald-faced hypocrisies, as if to say, no, you all are being quite selective with your interpretation and being outright brazenly hypocritical with your interpretations and the incongruities between your practice and the spirit of what is actually written, that you like to hold up so often as a kind of convenient shield for what atrocious things you're trying to perpetrate. So the alternative history there kind of poses that antidote to the winner's narrative, the winner's history book. It points to this idea of, well, what is the reality? What is American reality? What is the reality of the American idea, identity? Who is American? Who can be American? And it's really just serves to be one grand creative calling out of BS, really, with just this status quo, with just this this status quo selling point of their interpretation of what America is, what Americanness is, and who can be American. So that's something that I had to stop and think about your question for a second when I first saw it emailed to me, because I realized that whole problem of the American identity and the sort of ever becoming nature of Americanness, because again, another part of the, I guess, the disingenuousness of the status quo narrative is that it's something that's supposed to be fixed and this is the way it is, as opposed to something that is organic and ever becoming. All of these things to me seemed almost something that just kind of goes without saying in terms of establishing that idea through protest and revolution, particularly through the literary revolution of alternative history, especially through the lens of Afrofuturism. So I think it's just one of those things that I stop from the get-go and say, okay, well, first of all, let's talk about this whole American business and let's get a few definitions clear. Or quite the opposite, okay, let's purposefully muddy the definition to point out the problem with those who try to make it such a fixed thing for whatever purposes they have.
Okay, I like that answer. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that's the literary portion. So for those, the remaining four, your topics were historical. So I'll start with you first, Dr. Jing. Both of your essays on the historical figures, they both focus on, music and dance. And you've already touched on this, so if you don't mind, just elaborate maybe a bit further, maybe on the cultural, importance, and really, maybe even the social importance, I should say, on how important music and arts is to African culture, and then by extension to Black people, Black culture in general.
Okay, thanks. Let me start off by saying that one of the weaknesses of the civil rights movement was that there was no cultural program apart from encouraging Black people to integrate into white society, which was to a large extent responsible for their plight in the first place. So the first person who, not actually the first person, but he was actually echoing a view that had already existed, was Malcolm X, who actually asked Black people to go back to their own cultural roots. And to him, the salvation of Black people lay in their own cultural foundation and not elsewhere. Such a view, of course, coming from Malcolm X should not be surprising. Remember that his father was a follower of Marcus Garvey. And it was Marcus Garvey who first espoused that political philosophy. So out of this thinking grew up, the Black Power struggle. And now an offshoot of the Black Power movement was this new philosophy now that was started by Molenac Karenga called Kaweda. Kaweda actually is the reconstruction of Black culture. In other words, it's very, very important for Black people to go back to their own cultural roots, to assert themselves. You see, way back when this movement started in the United States, the whole notion of dance was equal. In fact, if you were not doing ballet, you were not dancing. If you came up with something, they'll say, oh, one of those African fabrications and so on. And dance was ballet. So in 1952, Fodéba Keïta, who was a Guinean, that was a brilliant student and had been sent to France to go and actually practice dance classique, because he was very good in theater, he was very good in poetry. So after doing dance classique, he felt that, hey, but at least I can use some of the principles here, apply it to my own African environment. So when he started the whole idea of ballet African, people laughed. They said, are you crazy? What strange thing, ballet African? Say, come on, man, you people are you are just being ridiculous. He said nothing. When he went back to Guinea, he went now to far-flung villages, got the best djembe, you know, the drum, the best djembe player, got the best singer, he got best poet, the best dancers, brought them all to Conakry. Around this period too, of course, Guinea had its independence, and then the president was somebody who put a lot of emphasis on culture. So he put together this team, which he styled Les Ballets Africains. They practice, and then they went back to France. So when he said he went back to France, put up posters that he has come now to show you the ballet African he was talking about. Obviously, people laughed and they just thought he had gone crazy, because to them, they felt that, oh, maybe you are going to see some black dude putting on tight pants with bulging manhood, maybe something tiptoeing on stage and then listening to Mozart or some very strange, they were expecting something funny. What he had in store for them was completely different. They brought in the djembe, acrobats, and then put on a show that held Paris spellbound for 6 months going. They were producing to a packed house. So that the message now left, and then, so by 1959, the information had already crossed and was in America. So they visited America in 1959. So for the first time, African Americans saw something that was from Africa being projected in a very positive light, first in Europe, because Americans always had this inferiority complex vis-a-vis the Europeans, for reasons that still baffle me up to this day. But because it was coming from Europe, oh yeah, then it must be good. So the French are taking it off, and then they said, in fact, there was a lot of noise about ballet African. So when they came and presented their show, of course, Americans themselves realized what they were talking about. It was such a beautiful show. So now, at a time when African Americans were still struggling to find their feet culturally, this was a breath of fresh air. Came in, and then they saw the relevance. So the importance of dance in African culture is that it encompasses all the other arts forms. Because if you just take music, then music is just music. If you take sculpture, it's just sculpture. But what dance does is that in dance, you have sculpture, you have fashion, you have poetry, you have history, you have music, you have dance proper, you have choreography. So all those elements are put together. So as a tool for integration, even within Black community itself, it means that if somebody is a writer and doesn't like to play music, he has a place within African dance. If somebody is a poet and doesn't believe in dancing, he has a place in the African dance. If somebody is a fashion designer and he doesn't believe in the artistic, he has a place in sculpture and so on and so forth. So ultimately, dance in Africa society is community itself. Well, I think I've used up my 5 minutes. And so, which explains why I put a lot of emphasis on dance, because that is the route to Black liberation. It will bring our people together. It will give them a sense of community, which is pretty much lacking, because you go to, say, one of our neighborhoods, the first thing is, oh, this guy is a blood. This one is a creep. Then they start fighting each other. Part of the reason why they are doing that is because there aren't structures within those communities into which they can actually fit. Dance provides that framework within which they can feed themselves. Now, with different people making the various contributions, and then thereby forming the community that we so desperately seek. That is what was destroyed during the days of slavery. That was what was destroyed in Africa through the French policy of assimilation. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. For our remaining 3 panelists, we coming close to the hour, so if you don't mind, keep it as brief as you can, around 5 minutes. Stay. Okay, Dr. Ankumah, what are your opinions on the rhetoric used by Zora Neale Hurston? Because as you know, she was, even though being a very superb writer, very, discovering writer, she was rejected by members of the Harlem Renaissance. Do you think that sort of grassroots use of that rhetoric was part of that, or what's your opinion, or what's your thoughts on it?
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
For me, it wasn't really too much of a surprise because I'll bring an analogy from the African context. As you heard, I did my dissertation on Ngugi wa Thiong'o and his revolutionary drama. And one of the things Ngugi had said about language that I used was that we use language for 2 purposes. Number one, just to communicate, like we are communicating right now in English. But he also said that language is an expression of an entire culture. And it reflects a people's historical consciousness of their struggles, their social life, and where they have come from. And I'm quoting something that he said, in writing, one should hear all the whispering and the shouting and the crying and the loving and the hating of the many voices in the past. And those voices will never speak to a writer in a foreign language. That's his own thing. And in fact, he'll call language the memory bank of a people's way of life. And so for him, in fact, he switched from using English to use his native language, because he didn't want his people to be cut off from what he was writing about. And I feel like Zora Neale Hurston was doing the same thing. In fact, she was interviewed once, and she was talking about her language, and she told the reporter that to lose the folklore and folk music of rural African-American folk would be a tremendous loss, not just, as she said, to the Negro race, but to American culture as a whole. Because that language has given, for example, she mentioned 3 different areas. The use of metaphor and simile. Black people use this in a way that white people don't use language that same way. We were talking recently about something that we heard on the news, and the person was talking about somebody came up a day late and $1 short. And I was just commenting on it. I was telling my husband, yeah, that's language. As you understand what they want to say, it's not going to be said like the same way in by other people. So she believed in that, and she wanted that to come out, because if it didn't come out, then obviously it was not representing the people that she's supposed to be talking for. Now, other writers didn't like that, because obviously one of the things which happen, especially when people have been colonized and dominated, when they come out, it's like you want to prove that you can write like a white person. You can use language like you can use language. Dr. Indy talked about Achebe. One of the things that even Batola had written even before Achebe, but Batola was using language in a way that embarrassed educated Africans. And they didn't like that. So Achebe's one, which was very close to the Europeans' way of expressing things, was more welcoming to them than Batola's language. And that's the same thing with Zora Neale Hurston. She wasn't sanitizing language. Her critics, Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, all of them were writing to suit a particular audience. So they felt like what she was doing was embarrassing them in front of Black people by bringing this out. But she had no shame about that. She wanted to tell it like it is. She wanted the language to be the language of her people. And like Amiri Baraka would say, it's a language, a rhetoric of anger also. And so to correct it, you come back and use it the way that you want to use language. So yeah, I think that it was revolutionary in that sense, that she wanted to break from being forced to assimilate into the culture, into the language of the same people that are oppressing. It wanted that's freedom to represent the voice of the people that is representing. And we know our time is running.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hendricks, your question. Given the efforts of the college students of the Black culture, what is your opinion on the importance of youth involvement in education regarding their history, racially and culturally? And also, there's kind of a corollary to it. How can you teach young people in mainland America to create a successful liberation movement using their example?
Okay, thanks for the question. First, I would state, I'll give you the title of my contribution again, and then the overall work. The topic of my contribution looked at the Black Cultural Organization, which was a student progressive organization at the College of the Virgin Islands that existed from 1968 to 1974. The overall title of my work looked at Black awareness and Black nationalism in the US Virgin Islands and how it impacted the US Virgin Islands politically, socially, and culturally. To answer the first question, in terms of education, how important it is, I think it is very important, very much so. I'll use within the context of the study that I did, you'll find that these were young people at well, today it's a university, but back then it was a college, at the College of the Virgin Islands. As in other individuals and organizations, there was a lot of opposition to the group's initiatives and so forth. But the mere fact that they were young people, relatively speaking, was able to capture the attention, it was able to capture the interest of the larger or the wider conservative views of Black Virgin Islanders. In terms of the second question, looking at how I personally would view it, I would basically state as it relates to bringing a sense of awareness or a sense of consciousness to the people in the mainland United States. Here is it, the US Virgin Islands, looking at it contextually at that point, it was and still is a self-governing territory, a colony of the United States. A population that roughly at that time was about maybe 60 to 65,000 people, but they were able to make inroads. They were able to organize, they were able to articulate their position as it relates to the suppression being brought about from a social, political, and economic standpoint with regards to the system of racism and white supremacy. And they were able to impact not just the society, not just the consciousness of the general populace in terms of reclaiming their identity and humanity, but they were able to, even up until today, even though there are still some limitations to it, you can still see some positive ramifications from it. So to answer the second question, how would I use it as an example? I would put it into context, as I said, to say that, again, you're having a non-self-governing people, a relatively small people, a voiceless people, which is part of the theme of this whole event, people who were subalterns, okay, people who basically were unrepresented, but because of the mentality in terms of collectivism, in terms of getting the people together, showing a sense of solidarity, consciousness, they were able to make some sort of positive change. So basically, that's how I would answer the two questions.
Sir, thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome.
Last but not least, Dr. Tilghman. So my question was, I was very interested in your take on Rodney, your chapter on Rodney. And since he being a historian, as you said, he saw all of the damage that capital globalism has done. How does his solutions compare to, say, Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey's methods to raise and bolster the working class out of the poverty that it was put upon them by various factors?
Yeah, and I'm gonna get this out in 3 minutes because I know we pressed for time. But to answer that one, if you look at the goals that Walter Rodney, Booker T. Washington, and Marcus Garvey had for working class Black people, because that was their following. They had a huge following among working class Black people. The goal was pretty much, economic independence, mostly by Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey, to resist oppression, resistance against oppression, and also a reclaiming of a Black identity. That was something that's very essential for all three of them. Now, of course, they had different methods and different ideologies going towards to achieve these goals. Walter Rodney, of course, is Marcus Leninist, and of course, socialist than Marcus Leninist. He was not capitalist. You look at Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey, they supported capitalism, but they didn't support capitalism that was to the extent of exploitation. Because if you take a look at the chapter that I read, understand about Walter Rodney and what he's feeling. He is looking at decolonization going on both on the continent of Africa and the Caribbean, and he's looking at how the rise of neocolonialism, these American businesses coming in and sucking up the land and everything else. He's also looking at African leaders, particularly one that he was working with in Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, who was one along with Kwame Nkrumah, coming out of the Pan-African Congress in Manchester. And again, later on, when the goal of decolonization of the continent of Africa, one of these statements was you really have to do a real deep analysis of capitalism, because slavery and colonialism really modernized capitalism. So you get those ideas that this is something you have to do away with. And of course, you get African socialism, where he began to adopt Ujamaa. And then later on, other things of social and Marxist ideas as well. The goal was you had to create a society, particularly for the Black working class, where their social welfare needs are met, and work and more as in a communal society, not so much as an individualistic society. All right. Now, of course, those goals were his goals were cut short when he was working with the Workers' People's Alliance in Guyana. He was assassinated. But those, that was the goal that he was, and the goal he was using was using policies and using government, part of nationalism as well. With Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey, I mean, again, they adopted ideals of capitalism, but they wanted to use it where it benefits the Black community, not just the individuals, right? And also Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey are Black nationalists themselves, very similar to Walter Rodney. And I'll give you a great example. Look at Booker T. Washington. If you look at his experimentation with agriculture, George Washington Carver, really helped the Black working class in terms of not only planting crops during the time when the boll weevil ate up everything, but they utilized and revamped the soil and able to use and become farmers to kind of be self-sufficient for themselves. And that was major. Not only did that it didn't just revolutionize Macon County and Alabama, but the entire rural South, where now you have crop extensions. That's what you have there. With Marcus Garvey, the same thing. Even though he talked about Black capitalism and buy Black and everything else, understand something. He's using it as a communal sense. Remember, when he created the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, you have nurses in the African Legion who dealt with the social problems the Black community was actually dealing with.
Dr. Tilghman, you muted.
Yes. Yeah, it said muted. Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay. So, and that was the thing is itself. So, so those three things, economic independence, resisting colonization, self-identity, even though they had different aspects, different ideologies, their goals were probably meant by those three things. So, and I'm gonna end it right there. I know I'm pressed for time, so I said end it right there.
Yes, sir. Appreciate the response. Okay, so that ends all the panelists, your specific questions. So now we'll open the floor to any questions the participants have of any of the panelists. We'll open that very quickly, and if your questions, keep them brief, of course. But any questions from participants to any of the panelists?
Well, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to make a remark.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's in connection with the conscript. That before that, the conscript was written in an African language. A Southern African writer too, his name is Thomas Mofolo, had also written a book as far back at, I think, 1925 or so. The title is Shaka, you know, like a novel on the Great Zulu King.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
I have a question. Is this an opportunity where the panelists can also ask questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The instructor, the professor who wrote about Walter Rodney, can you direct me as to where I can find some of your materials on Walter Rodney?
Oh yeah, Walter Rodney. Yeah, I mostly was doing a literature review of his books. Of course, I use How Europe Undeveloped Africa. I use a dissertation in history of the Upper Guinea, Upper Guinea coast. Grounding with My Brothers, because Grounding with My Brothers were the speeches that he gave on the University of West Indies about Black Power. And they're all compiled into the book. There's a new one coming out in August called Decolonial Marxism. And these were speeches done on Walter Rodney about Pan-Africanism, Marxism, and everything else. This is new. And it comes out in August of 2022. So you want to look out for that one. And also, if you can, make your way to Atlanta, Georgia at Clark Atlanta University. The Walter Rodney papers are there as well. So you can read all his manuscripts and everything else that he has that has been unpublished.
Thank you very much. Also, can you just, can you give me your first name and your last name, please?
Oh, my first name is John, John. Last name is Tilghman, Tilghman. I can put it in the chat, so, you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Tilghman.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I assume that's the end of the Q&A, and there'll be no additional comments from the panelists or any last words. Very quickly, anybody?
All right.
Just want to thank, oops.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank all the panelists for a great session. Lots of some fun facts. So thank you so very much, really. I just wish the session was a little bit longer because I could not tire from hearing you, and we learned so much from this presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Esunga. Any closing remarks from the panelists? I think that's what Mr. Enoch asked.
Yes.
Well, I'll have to say one thing, and maybe the other panelists have other things to say. The crux of everything we've said here today points to committed activism, points to unrelenting vocalization of our discontent as a people. It points to the repressive or the pervasive repressive machine that is against us. And that amongst us, we have visionaries, we have revolutionaries who in their role actually push towards our liberation. And as they push towards our liberation struggle can actually challenge and moderate the thinking of the oppressor. That's rest and leave it to other panelists if they have a word or two to say. That's my closing remark.
Anyone else? Well, I think that's the end of our roundtable. Once again, I just want to give an extended thank you so much to all the panelists who gave our comments. I really enjoyed the book, and I'm very honored to meet and see and hear all of you. So Yeah, that's the end of our roundtable. So everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
sir.
Have a
Thank you
good day.
so much.
All right.
All right, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Javon, long time no